CEO and co-founder. There's a lot of news this morning already. Check out GoLocal, just broke a story. Students will be walking out over at Classical High School about a dispute with some faculty members. We've got all the details, but I want to go down to the University of Virginia. Chair of the Political Science Department, Jennifer Lawless, thanks so much for joining us.
I'm happy to.
So we've got a lot of issues to talk about, a stock market that's crashing, EU's inflation rate is now over 10%, and I want to start down at the White House and talk about a major gaffe. And we can say, oh, gaffes are gaffes, but this one, I think, caught everyone's attention, and even a press
corps. I feel like Barack Obama with that fly. Sorry.
There was a weatherman up here who was scared by a spider on the floor while he was giving his broadcast the other day. I don't want to say he went up on his tippy toes and tried to run away, but not far off. Nice try to distract me away from Joe Biden's major gaffe this week. Well done, pro-Biden person. Joe Biden, a congresswoman who just died, he had been at a memorial service for her. This isn't a question of something 20 or 30 years ago. He called out her name and asked if she was sort of in the room. She's dead. What's your reaction on this?
It wasn't good. I mean, I don't think that it speaks to any broader issue of cognitive impairment. I think that there are a million things going on, and he didn't realize that she was the same congresswoman who died in a car crash. His staff should have, made sure that he was aware of that, given that she had been instrumental in getting this bill through, and they clearly weren't. So it's unfortunate, but I don't think it's particularly damning.
White House staff, press secretary, seem to, almost pour gasoline on the gaffe by sort of criticizing the press corps for raising it. I mean, here's a guy who's nearly 80 years old, who on any given day can look quite young and spry, and on any other given day can look doddering and unsteady and sometimes a little bit confused in his speech pattern. This seemed to be a little bit of a more dangerous one, that this was a real swing and a miss, kind of like saying, I want to thank Vice President Nixon for all his assistance to me and President Eisenhower. I mean,
so I don't think it was that bad. I mean, this is a congresswoman who was instrumental in putting together the bill. And it takes a long time for a bill to become a law. During that time, unfortunately, there was this tragic car accident. She was killed. This is not like, it was a mistake and it's a problem. And again, I think it's something that no candidate or elected official wants to do. But, I don't think this was an example of hearkening back 40 or 50 years and thanking somebody that had absolutely nothing to do with what he was talking about. He was thanking somebody who did play an active role and who relatively recently died. Not good.
How many more? How many?
Thanking FDR.
How many more of these does he get? Does he?
6. I mean, you don't want any.
Yeah.
Right? But I mean, I think at the end of the day, and we've seen this in politics for decades and decades and decades, no one gaffe in a situation like this is enough to be a problem. What happens is these gaffes become part of a pattern that reinforces people's pre-existing tendencies toward or against that candidate or predispositions. And so you're right that if people think that Biden might be too old or might be senile, making a mistake like this is far more damning to him than it would be to a younger candidate who just had, who just misspoke. So he will have to make sure he will not get other opportunities to apologize for making a mistake like this again. He can't make a mistake like this again.
Let's go to Little Rhode Island and talk about the second congressional race. For full disclosure, you are a donor to Seth Magaziner, the Democratic candidate who's running against Alan Fung. You know both of these individuals. You probably, correct me if I'm wrong, you know Alan Fung better actually on a personal level, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so this is a battle. There are barbs and charges going back on a daily basis, huge criticism of one another. It's getting to be, I don't want to say it's the nastiest race in Rhode Island history, but we're probably not far off from that characterization. Talk about where you think this race is right now, and give us the key. How does each of these candidates win this race?
At the end of the day, this is a race about party and party control. And it has a lot less to do with Alan Fung and Seth Magaziner than it has to do with Nancy Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy, and whether people want Republicans or Democrats in control of the House of Representatives. And as a result, the allegations that both Fung and Magaziner are launching and lobbying at one another have a lot more to do with the national parties than necessarily either of these two personalities. So this is a situation where Seth Magaziner wins this race, I think, if he can make the case that it doesn't matter what positions Alan Fung holds, it doesn't matter how he differentiates himself from Republicans in Washington. What matters is that sending Alan Fung to Washington is another vote for Kevin McCarthy and the Republicans' agenda. Alan Fung manages to win this race if he can make the case that he is not Kevin McCarthy. He is different. He understands Rhode Island, and sending him to Washington at a time when the Republicans will likely control the House anyway is an opportunity for Rhode Island to at least have a voice in what's going on in the House of Representatives. I think both arguments could potentially carry weight. At the end of the day, it seems to me that Magaziner has a better shot simply because this seat has been in Democratic hands for more than 20 years. Democrats are ready to fight hard to maintain Democratic control, and the Democrats are going to be putting a lot of money into this contest.
So let's carve out one other Fung argument, though, which is, listen, the Republicans are going to win the House of Representatives. We don't know about the Senate, but it is a done deal. There's no two ways about it. And it's far more important that I be representing Rhode Island as the sole Republican in the delegation, just like John Chafee and Claudine Schneider and Ron Makeley and other well-known, well-respected Rhode Island Republicans did, so I can get things done for Rhode Island. If you send Seth Magaziner down to Washington, D.C., there will be people who work in the House cafeteria who have more influence over public policy than freshman Seth Magaziner in the minority party has. And that's absolutely true. Those extra helpings slapped on the food tray goes a long ways towards getting bills passed, more so than being a freshman in the minority.
Look, I think that in 1990 or 1995 or even 2000, if you were a member of the Out Party and demonstrated a willingness to engage in some degree of bipartisanship and compromise, you could get things done in a way that you no longer can. So that's exactly true. But I also think that being a Republican in 1990 or 1995 or even 2000 is a lot different than being a Republican now. And Democrats and unaffiliated voters would be able to swallow a Claudine Schneider or a Lincoln Chafee as a Republican. They're not going to be able to swallow a Kevin McCarthy, and that's what Alan Fung represents, and that's what he ultimately brings. I'm also not convinced, as somebody who studies Congress and as somebody who studies congressional effectiveness, that any freshman member is going to be particularly powerful. Alan Fung will outrank Seth Magaziner if the Republicans take control in terms of in terms of power simply because of party, but he's still going to be the low man on the totem pole. So it's unclear that he's going to walk in there and have any degree of real authority.
Okay, let's go with a turnout question. The primaries were low turnout, not record low turnouts, but extremely disappointing, I think, for everybody who wants to see good civics and a good, strong democracy. To give you a number, we extrapolated and published today, Brett Smiley, the mayor of Providence, does not have a general election because there's no Republican or independent. He won 9,000 votes in the Democratic primary. The number of registered voters in the city of Providence is 125,000. He is going to run the city of Providence with just 7% of the registered vote, with votes from 7% of the registered voters. I mean, is this a democracy? So let's go to the general election. All indications are, because there's really only, it appears to be two highly competitive races, the governor's in the first, that voter turnout is again going to disappoint, even though we've made it easier and early voting and automatic registration for voting. Voting turnout is going to turn out. Does that help the Republicans, or does it help the Democrats to have this lower turnout?
Well, first, I'm not positive that that premise is actually right. We're going to see over the course of the next 4 to 5 weeks a lot of efforts intended to drive up voter turnout. And the Democrats nationally are already beginning to make the case that if you care about Roe versus Wade, if you care about a woman's right to choose, the only way to guarantee these kinds of protections is to codify Roe. And the only way you can codify Roe is if you keep majorities in both the House and the Senate. And in fact, the Senate numbers have to grow by 2. So I do think if we look at what's gone on in other races in special elections across the country and in primaries, that Democrats still have an advantage in terms of enthusiasm when they're told that choice is really what's at stake here. So I do think there are opportunities there to make this not necessarily as low a turnout affair as we might expect. Assuming it is a low turnout race, I think it ultimately helps the Democrats, because if you just look at the base level of people in Rhode Island who are either Democrats or unaffiliated and the candidates for whom they typically vote, the Democrats have an advantage. That means that Alan Fung and other Republicans on the ballot are going to have to do everything that they can to gin up support among the lower number of Republicans who live in the state, and that's a harder task.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with you on the enthusiasm factor. I mean, this was a dismal primary season. You had massive amounts of spending. You had a lot of candidates. You had a really, in my lifetime, the most competitive primaries we've ever seen, up and down the ballot. A tremendous number of races that could drive people out, and they just didn't go. I mean,
so you had really competitive primaries, but the stakes aren't as high as when you get to a general election. And we know that at the end of the day, stakes can motivate turnout in a way that competitiveness alone cannot. So we'll see what happens. I'm not willing to say that you're wrong. I'm willing to say we should wait and see.
That was almost a victory for me. That folds right into the midterms. Listen, it looks like on the Democratic side, something that probably wasn't the case a year ago, that the Democrats are going to hold the Senate. Whether or not they're going to add seats, but they're going to hold their 50, maybe get 51, right? Is that sort of the Senate breakdown right now, picking up especially that key seat in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, if they pick up Pennsylvania, and it looks like either Ohio or Wisconsin, one of those two might go their way. If they're able to do that and hold on to Nevada, then they're in better shape than anybody expected. Now, they obviously, though, the issue here is 51 matters a lot less than 52. And so the goal at this point is going to be to try and ensure 2 gains and not just 1, although obviously at this point they'd be happy holding on to 50.
And what's your argument about why 51 is so much more valuable than 50? I mean, 52 is so much more valuable than 51.
Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema have both said unequivocally that they will not get rid of the filibuster for any votes on any new types of legislation, whether it be to codify Roe, to move forward voting rights, or anything like that. 2 additional senators on the Democratic side mean that they can vote and get those 51 votes with Kamala Harris, to make sure that the filibuster can get gotten rid of. Now, that becomes a lot less important if the Republicans have the House, because you need both chambers to push forward legislation, but it's a requirement if we're going to get rid of the filibuster.
Okay, now you have to put on we're going to inject you with truth serum right here. It takes place instantaneously. What is the chances that the Democrats hold the House?
Slim.
Okay.
I mean, a month ago,
the day Lincoln Chafee announced he was
really
running for president of the United States.
I'm sorry?
I just have a little ear problem. Give me 1 second. Okay, we should be back. Bad earpiece, always a problem. Okay, The truth serum has now fully taken place. You are under the cone of truthfulness. What are we talking about? Republicans 10 up. Right now, Democrats are 7 up on the majority. 15-seat swing?
I don't know that it's going to be close. I mean, I think there's a very small
Remember,
chance.
you took the truth serum.
I know. I think there's a very small chance that the Democrats can hold. And if they hold, it's only because the Republicans fielded some completely ridiculous candidates across the country that will lose in districts that Republicans should actually win. I could imagine the Republicans coming out of this with a 4 to 5 seat margin, and that's all they need. The Democrats have managed with that. So I think it's very, very unlikely. What I will say is that if turnout is higher than we expect, and in 2018, for example, it was, then there's the possibility. The other thing I would note, and Nancy Pelosi made this point the other day, is there's not a lot of low-hanging fruit out there anymore, right? So most districts are represented by somebody who should be representing those districts when you look at partisan match. So Democrats are basically representing Democratic districts and Republicans the same. So none of these races that, is in the swing race or, unsafe, like toss-up category is a foregone conclusion. And that means that it comes down to turnout and what these candidates do in the next 6 weeks.
So let's work through it. Republicans take the House, Democrats hold the Senate. When does Joe Biden have to announce that he is running for re-election or not? How many days, weeks, or months can he delay before making such a pronouncement?
I can't imagine that he would do it before January. I mean, he wants this Congress to end. But if it's going to be an open field, candidates need a year before Iowa and New Hampshire, which means that he would have to start making announcements in, January. He would have to make a decision in January, February of 2023, I would assume.
And does anyone significant just say, I'm not waiting? As soon as these midterms are over and, a aspirational governor of California, as an example, does one of these potential competitive candidates say, sorry, Joe, I'm not waiting. You're 80 years old. You did a great job. Greatly appreciate your service to this country. But the Democratic Party needs somebody to lead the country forward.
I don't think so. I think the only way that happens is if the midterms go so poorly for Democrats and so much worse than anybody expected that it's clear that there needs to be a shock to the system immediately. But my sense is, no, we're not going to see that. I do think that on the Republican side of the aisle, we will begin to see people say, you know what, I'm not waiting around to determine whether Donald Trump is going to say that he's running or not. I'm throwing my hat into the ring, and I'm going to try to garner as much support from voters out there and the Trump base as I can in the meantime.
And is that DeSantis? I mean, is he going to be in this race early? He's clearly the Republican frontrunner, but based on polling after Donald Trump, he's kind of Donald Trump without the baggage necessarily, and now he's getting a lot of
helps. I mean, as awful as that sounds, he's been on TV nonstop, and he has seemed reasonable. He has not seemed like Donald Trump. This is not throwing paper towels at people in Puerto Rico, right? This is running a state and coordinating with local, state, and federal officials, being respectful of FEMA and even the Bush administration. This is the kind of leadership that people are looking for, and that DeSantis, I think, can use to differentiate himself from Trump in style. I don't think that it extends beyond things like natural disasters, but he would be well situated, I would assume, right after, assuming he wins the governor's race, right after that, to say, all right, my eyes are set on, higher prospects. Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia here, has also not said that he plans to finish his term. He said that he plans to finish the agenda that he set out when he became governor. And so I wouldn't be surprised if he, who has been going around the country trying to raise money as well, throws his hat into the ring.
You either had a Biden moment or a Freudian slip. You called it the Bush administration rather than the Biden.
Did I really?
Yeah, you did. Yeah.
Well, when I think of FEMA, I can't,
Happy birthday to you. You look great for 79. What should we be looking for? The January 6th big committee meeting got postponed. Are we going to see that coming up? What's the next week to 10 days going to look like in Washington politics?
Yeah, my sense is that part of the reason it was postponed was because they interviewed Ginny Thomas in person yesterday, and they want that testimony to be part of the next hearing. I think we are going to be seeing in the next couple of weeks whether the committee makes a referral to the Department of Justice. And it's a fraught decision. They don't want to make this look like it's a completely political decision. By the same token, they want to give the Department of Justice everything that Merrick Garland might need to move forward and say, we're going to charge. So I think the way that Donald Trump's various lawsuits and legal proceedings play out over the course of the next few weeks is key, not only because it's important to find out whether Trump is held accountable for his actions, but also because it will help determine for a lot of these Republicans whether running for president seems like a smart thing to do. So as the committee wraps up its work, I think it's going to sort of, coincide with beginning to be able to read the tea leaves as to a lot of these Republican potential candidates.
Will we have that hearing this coming week, or will it go to the week after?
I think it depends. I don't know. Ginny Thomas testified for a long time. I don't know how much they need to, take from that and how centrally that would feature. If not this week, then I can't imagine that it wouldn't be. If not next week, I can't imagine it would be longer than the week after that.
As always, Jennifer Lawless, the chair of the Political Science Department at the University of Virginia, we greatly appreciate your insights on everything Washington, the battles for Congress, and even the race here in the 2nd Congressional District. Thank you so much for joining us. For everybody else, stay tuned for a beautiful Friday fall afternoon. There's a lot going on. Stay tuned for updates throughout the day on GoLocal. Also, if you haven't gotten boosted, get the new booster shot. They say it's delicious. It gives you the protection for the variants that are now cropping up and are in rotation, and make you nice and healthy to go and do fun things this fall and winter. Thanks, everybody.